Hey, this is Blag the Ripper from the Dwarves, and you're watching Crash and Bleed.
So this is your second time on this podcast. You were the very third guest that I ever reached out to back when I started out. And we had some audio issues, like some fuzz coming through on your end, so I had to underline it all with a little bit of music. But I thought it was a good podcast. Like, I was just watching it back in preparation for this, and I think I did a good job, all things considered.
Well, we all got to start somewhere, Jay.
Well, yeah, man. I mean, this is going to be a hell of a podcast too. We've actually got an anniversary to talk about. Did you know that this was actually 40 years of horror stories?
Wow. No, I didn't know that. 40
Yeah,
years of horror stories. Wow, that's unthinkable.
I got new shot, and it's gonna sound too good to you. Don't know nothing, baby.
So do you ever go back and actually listen to that record?
I don't really go back and listen to my stuff, but I do listen to myself. I just listen to whatever I'm working on now. And so by the time I'm done with it, I'm pretty bored and over it. Like, I've heard it a million times. Like, I listen to it pretty obsessively until it's out. Every once in a while, I'll go back and listen to something, or if it comes on, but usually all that comes on is kind of the hits. Somebody will be playing Everybody's Girl somewhere or whatever. But I also have to go back sometimes if there's remastering. And at some point, we remastered Lick It. And so that was fun to revisit all that. The drumming is kind of problematic on a lot of that early Dwarf stuff. I didn't really understand drums and what they were. I didn't have the proper respect for them. So it was sort of like anybody that was willing to go sit behind the kit was fine. And so that bothers me a little bit. But I think the garage rock spirit of it and the fun of it was there, and I remember playing guitar on all that stuff. I sort of gave up on guitar playing after that. He who took over, he came in originally as keyboards when we had the 60s thing. And then he started playing guitar. And I didn't like playing guitar live. I didn't think I had a good command of it. I never thought I was much of a guitar player. But what's funny is on these last couple records, I went back and started playing guitar again, which was fun. There's a certain quality to the way I do it that adds a certain amount of Dwarves hysteria to it that's actually helpful. It's sort of pushing the beat a little too fast. So if you have a good drummer and then you're doing that, it kind of gives it this feeling of hectic rock and roll. That's fun, But I stand behind the old stuff. I think we're kind of unique in that way of bands. Like, a lot of bands, we evolved and got better production and better musicians and, looked more at songwriting and all that stuff. But then we also would stick with let's just make this a hardcore jam, and Jenkem, this new record, is a lot just hardcore, straightforward. And even before that, people think we started with Blood, Guts, and Pussy, and that was our first album. But really, you're right. It was Horror Stories, and the 60s stuff is really where we started.
Well, I was thinking today, because I was listening to it, I was thinking that the Suburban Nightmare actually sounded a hell of a lot cleaner than Horror Stories. Did you find that? Was that a conscious thing in the band? Let's just crank up the noise for the Horror Stories record?
I mean, very little was conscious because none of us knew anything about production and we didn't have a producer. I mean, literally, it was like you rented studio time and you hoped, so I think, Suburban Nightmare, we went into the studio and we recorded with this guy and we hoped, engineers tend to want to go, you want to clean, right? You want to hear yourself, we didn't. And then when that album was out, we felt like, God, this is so clean, it's not right. So then Horror Stories was the next level of we were pushing it a little more. And I played a lot of fuzz tone guitar and it was get that dirty stuff in there. But what you start to realize after a while is that what's clean and what's dirty is somewhat a function of thinking about frequencies and recording shit properly so you can really crank the guitar because there's nothing interfering with it, and you can really crank the vocal because there's nothing interfering with it, and so you can get to this point where shit sounds quote unquote clean, but it's really heavy and well produced. And I think we've gotten there with a lot of records that we made, but to some people's ears, it's like, then that's clean because they prefer like a lo-fi sound that sounds more like a bunch of guys just went in and didn't know anything and just kind of busted it out. And that's exactly what those early Dwarves records were. I mean, nobody had any conception of like production or mastering or EQs. I mean, we just didn't even think about it.
Yeah, well, I mean, just on the subject of those early days, then, as the band started to evolve and play a little bit faster, and I do see that natural progression into that hardcore style. And you say at the time you grew up going to a lot of hardcore shows, so it was a natural progression, but was it ever a record that came out that helped influence that sound at all? I'm guessing something like the Misfits Earth AD would have been like a big deal for you guys.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, Blood, Guts, and Pussy is like an homage to the Misfits Earth AD record. I mean, I just couldn't believe it when I heard it. It was such a cool example of what hardcore could be when it was actually rock and roll. You know, because when I started going to shows and I was 14, 15, 16 years old, you know, you'd see a hardcore band and it was just like a caricature of something. It was like a bunch of guys with shaved heads going, you know, and it was very hard to see the rock and roll in it. And that's why I was kind of dedicated to like the 60s punk and the rockabilly, because it was like I could hear it and it was pleasant to your ears in a way. It was ripping and it was aggressive, but it was pleasant in a way that hardcore was just like but certain hardcore albums really blew my mind always, like Damaged by Black Flag and, you know, Walk Among Us, and these certain records where you were just like, they got it. Somehow they managed to be hardcore, but also have melody and hooks. You know, like Black Flag would say something like six pack, you know, it's like, well, that's the hook, you know, or you know, the Misfits would come back to like an oi chant, you know, whoa, all I want. And you'd kind of remember, oh shit, I remember that. That was the pop part of it, where there was all these bands that people liked that they'd talk about and that I know like have a space in punk rock history because they were important and they were there early. But I could just not hear any hooks in their music. And so like I didn't love that. Like a lot of the guys who are in my band now are big fans of a lot of that stuff, or they'll talk about Agnostic Front or whatever, you know. And to me, it's just like you know, I respect all that stuff. I understand that it was early on in its thing. You know, it's just for me as a listener, it never gave me a hook to grab onto. I like something with a lyrical hook and a musical hook and a little sound effect hook or whatever it is, like something that drags me into it. And I felt like bands like Black Flag and the Misfits had that, and then a lot of other bands that deserve their place in punk history. And I'm not trying to put them down, but they just didn't have that. You know what I mean? So I would be listening to it and just think, this is boring, you know? And then what kind of happened, you know, so then you'd go and play live and it's like, I'm standing there in a paisley tie and beetle boots and trying to make a sound that sounds interesting. And all around you, it's like punk bands and chaos and fun. And I was like, well, I want to be part of that. You know, I don't want to be, you know, that whole 60s crowd. It was like, oh, you don't have the right Vox teardrop guitar, and you don't have the right kind of paisley tie. That's a newer one or whatever it was. And you just feel like, look, dude, like this ain't rock and roll, you know, like, whereas I remember seeing, I had never heard of them. I had the MDC record, which again, I thought was very good and had little hooks on it. The first one, you know, John Wayne was a Nazi and different things like that. And so I went to see them, and there was a band on the bill called Minor Threat, which I had never heard of. And Minor Threat comes out and you're just like, God damn, these guys are so good. Every, you know, the songs had hooks. They were memorable. And of course, I couldn't hear the lyrics, so I didn't know about Straight Edge. I was probably high off my ass sitting there watching it. I didn't care about their image. I didn't know about that. It was just you really responded to like, whoa. And then, you look closer and it's like, fuck, these guys are my age. Like I'm 16 and they look like they're 16. And their band is really good. Like that was a wake up call for me. I remember going to that show and being like, fuck, we could be a lot better. We got to be a lot better. It was like Minor Threat, like kind of warned you, like, hey, people your age are doing this and doing it right. Um, but then, of course, when I found out what straight edge was, I had no interest in that. I got into rock and roll for pussy and drugs and having fun. I certainly was not interested in that other stuff. But it's funny. It touched me in a visceral way. And so, the more I experienced of that, the less interested I was in that whole 60s, 50s scene, which just seemed like people playing dress up. But the music was always more appealing to me. And it was, hardcore music was not always very satisfying to me. So by the time we make Blood Guts, a further element comes in because we recorded Blood Guts in like 89. The only record I was listening to at that point was Easy E, Easy Does It, and NWA Straight Outta Compton. Those were the most brilliant records. And again, my brain shifted again, like, whoa, what the fuck is this? Like, why does this feel so great and fresh and fun? Suddenly this punk stuff feels kind of old, but meanwhile I had written with my friends, this Misfits tribute record, Blood, Guts, and Pussy. And then people started paying attention to us. And so it was interesting how all that stuff tied together. Like sometimes what you're listening to bears no relation to what you're playing. And I didn't want to be like one of those white guys with a baseball cap on going, yo, you know what I mean? Like I didn't see any way in for me there.
Well, you talked about hooks in hardcore there, and this is probably going to sound crazy to you, but I thought the guitar and the vocal hook in the song Let's Get Pregnant was just so good. And it's maybe like a forgettable song for a lot of Dwarves fans because they only listen to like the Blood, Guts and Pussy stuff and onwards. But this track is just so great that I might end up covering this song, dude.
Let's get pregnant. Let's get pregnant. Yeah, it's got a little answer to it. Yeah. I like that one. Yeah, I mean, that was the transitionary stuff, right? The Toolin' for a Warm Teabag and Lucifer's Crank was kind of our transition between being a garage band and sort of becoming the hardcore Dwarves, Once it got to Blood Guts, we were hearing these thrash elements, mosh elements, like, when the way it slows down in Detention Girl, do, 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 do. It was like, yeah, we'll have like a slow down mosh thing where everybody starts slowing down. And then they go, we thought we were very clever with that. But again, there's a hook, right? It hurts so bad. And I'm so glad, and you could sing along. I mean, I think that was kind of the essence of the Dwarves. And sometimes the production got in the way, but I think for a lot of people who love it, it's that lack of production that brings them to it. It feels like a bunch of guys just going for it with no label behind it and no help. And that's what it was,
Yeah, well, I think it's funny because those songs got re-recorded later on in that same year, I think. And like both recording sessions of those tracks sound so terrible, but the songs are so great, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, I think we made Lucifer's Crank, and I was like, this isn't heavy enough. And so then we went and did Toolin', and then it was just like, you can't hear anything but guitar on Toolin'. Everything else is buried, and I thought that was heavier. Again, I didn't really understand that level of production where it's like, you can have heavy sounding guitar and still hear everything else if you know how to do it. But we had more of a primitive approach. We didn't really know how to do it. So it was just like, turn up the guitar, When I go back and listen to that now, I find the Lucifer stuff more satisfying, So it's funny how that works. And the only place you really get everything is the online version of Free Cocaine, where you get all of the Lucifer's Crank and all of the Tool and stuff. Because I think the double album of Free Cocaine really only has the Lucifer's Crank stuff, and the Toolin stuff is not really on there. Because there just wasn't room on the vinyl. I would have had to make a triple album, and there were all these extra tracks and different things. So that's kind of a strange one. So that's why every once in a while I'll reprint Toolin and just let somebody do it, or reprint Lucifer's Crank and just let somebody, some little label, do it, because that way you kind of get that in its pure form, you know. I mean, I kind of botched that whole trying to sum up that old era, you know. Someday I'll have to go back and actually make an album where it's like Lucifer's and Toolin and everything, and it works, you know. But I just haven't had the energy. I haven't been looking backward. I've been trying to look forward.
Yeah, well, we have 2 new records to talk about since the last time we had you on. We've got the Sunshine and Lollipops record. Am I right in saying that this is a recording of a practice session that you guys did leading up to Blood, Guts and Pussy?
That's exactly right. Yeah. So we went, it was the first time we went to Seattle, and they put us in the studio to just record a single, which was She's Dead and Fuckhead. But we did 14 songs because we're the Dwarves. And so the engineer said to the label who had paid to put us in there, you know, hey man, these guys, you don't have to give them shit. They made a whole record. You know, you should just put out a record with these guys. So it was kind of like that. Like, they weren't looking to sign somebody like us, but it was just so easy and so obvious, and they didn't have to put any money into it. And that tape sat unlistened to, unmixed for decades. But when I finally got all my records back from that label, I said, fuck, I'm going to mix this. And it's cool because Blood Guts, in a way, is a real definitive Dwarves record that people love, and it's got that cover. There were all these alternate pictures from that I wanted to get out. And then and now I had an excuse because there was this alternate recording. And it really is different because Blood Guts was done like albums of the era where, yeah, the whole band was together in the room recording, but then you just got the drums, and then you overdub the bass and you overdub the guitar. And that's what Blood Guts is. And it's a great record like that. But Sunshine Lollipops is just us live in the studio. No overdubs, nothing. It was just, that's what we sounded like. And so I think you get a different take on what came to be Blood Guts. Also, it's still part of that kind of bridge between Toolin and Lucifer's Crank, because it has songs on it like Eat You to Survive and She's Dead and Fuckhead. And I remember, you know, going home and maybe listening to a demo of that or doing something, going, we need more songs. And so I wrote Backseat of My Car and Drugstore, which came to be 2 of the most popular songs from Blood Guts. So there was like, I knew we needed a couple more songs and they had to follow a certain thing. Backseat of My Car is very similar to Eat You to Survive. Even the rhythm of Eat You to Survive, Backseat of My Car, the whole thing of it is very similar riff. And then, you know, Drugstore was like, we got to do something slower. That was our idea of a slow song. It was like a Ramones song or something with it. But even that, like, bites the Misfits when it goes to, it's like, oh, that's Halloween, you know. So it was very much a time when the Misfits and the Ramones were sort of in my head.
Well, were you guys calling yourselves a hardcore band at that time?
I think so, yeah. I mean, and that was kind of a demarcation point too, because when we moved to LA, we never moved to LA. When we moved to San Francisco, we were more of a 60s band. We were tied in with 60s bands, and that's who they'd have us play with. Every once in a while, we get to play with like Red Cross or somebody like that. But when we went to Seattle, they had never seen us before, and that scene was just starting to jump off. And we did our first show there in '89 with Guar. And so it was the first time people were like, oh, this is a hardcore band. And of course, hardcore, that was hardcore's lowest point, right? Because the high point of hardcore was like 81, 82, 83. Then that scene died, and there was sort of a post-punk thing, skronky, weird, arty music, you know, the good stuff being like, you know, the Butthole Surfers and groups like this. Hardcore really kind of went dormant, and most of the guys from hardcore bands, especially in California, kind of went glam and made a glam band to try and cash in and make some money. And that was kind of what happened. And we were like, went from being a 60s garage band, which was a movement that never took off, that nobody knew about, to being a hardcore band. It was like, why are you doing this? Like, why is anyone trying to be a hardcore band in 1989? It was just the least popular time of that. And so we kind of, just by strange coincidence, became like the token punk band of that Seattle scene, because all the people from that scene had grown up in punk bands or seeing punk bands, and they loved us and they recognized the energy of what we were doing. But it really didn't sound like what came to be called the grunge movement, which was kind of Stooges-y and slower and had that vibe to it.
So how do you explain the existence of the song I Hate Girls? Because you sound about 14 years old on that song. And that has to be before like most of the Suburban Nightmare recordings.
Yes,
so
that was the first song I ever wrote. Yeah, so again, I mean, the way I came into rock and roll music was kind of strange, right? I had heard rock and roll music on the radio when I was a little kid. Yummy, 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 I got love in my tummy, or Crocodile Rock. I would pretend I was singing to the girls in my class, whatever kind of pop. Back then, there was a thing called AM radio, which just played whatever the hits were. And they'd play white music and black music, whatever the hit was. And then the radio got more kind of segregated, and things changed. And then like my tastes, I was a pretty advanced kid, and my brother was like a jazz DJ. So I was listening to like John Coltrane and Roland Kirk and, very sophisticated jazz stuff. And then, my dad and my parents would liked musicals, and I liked the complexity of musicals. I would listen to things like Guys and Dolls and The Music Man and these things. And I really liked comedy, Monty Python's Flying Circus. And I saw them live when I was 10 years old at City Center in New York. I was obsessed with Monty Python. I memorized all of their albums and routines. And so I was into a more sophisticated thing as a kid. But at a certain point, I realized that I was not really talented and I couldn't really do that. And so hearing the Ramones really changed my life. It sounds corny to say, but it did, because suddenly it was like, wait, I can play that on guitar and I can sing that and I can write crazy lyrics like that. Like I can do this. So punk rock really saved me with its simplicity, in the sense that I could do it. Whereas there was stuff I could understand philosophically. Frank Zappa was my biggest influence, and he was all over the map: classical music, jazz music, doo-wop, rock and roll. So I had an understanding of things, but I couldn't execute on that. So I Hate Girls was one of the first things I ever attempted to write. And it was, so I moved to a new state, new school when I was a freshman in high school. I didn't know anybody. I didn't have any friends. I hadn't met anybody. So first day of school, I blew off the school bus. I thought that was for squares. I stuck out my thumb. And the senior picked me up, and he's like, nobody hitchhikes around here, man. I'll give you a ride to school. And I was like, okay. So he would pick me up every day. And I remember the first day, it was a strange record, and it sounded like Bob Dylan or something. And I'm like, what's this? Said, oh, it's the Velvet Underground's first album. And so within this like 1 month period, this guy, who again had very sophisticated taste, but of a different kind, literally turned me on to like the Nuggets albums, which had like the Seeds, Pushing Too Hard, and the Chocolate Watch Band, the 13th Floor Elevators, and all these very obscure 60s bands that nobody knew about at this time. This is 1980. And then, a week or two later, he's like, check this out. And he played me Eddie Cochran and Gene Vincent and like the original rockabilly guys. And I'm like, what the fuck is this? And then a couple weeks after that, we went to the movies together down in Evanston, Illinois. And we saw a movie called The Decline of Western Civilization. And so I got turned on to hardcore punk, 50s, 60s, all in like the same month or so. So it was all kind of the same thing to me. And I recognized the through line of like rock and roll. And I started to see a way in from myself that I could actually do something. And so, yeah, I think I wrote I Hate Girls sometime that freshman year or junior year. And then I started thinking more and more like 60s, and I didn't want to be like a prototype punk band. So I didn't really write something like I Hate Girls again. That kind of surfaced years later, So, yeah, it was I was always a big mix up of influences that are like radically different than everybody else's influences. I can still sing the whole Music Man musical if you need me to, but I but I didn't see myself in that, punk rock was the solution for me.
Yeah, well, had you guys had much experience playing live leading up to the recording of Blood, Guts and Pussy? Because I was going to get onto how violent the shows become. Like, had you had much experience playing those hardcore shows before that recording?
Well, yeah, by that time, I mean, the Dwarves moved to San Francisco in 1986. We'd played a bunch of shows in Chicago. We got to play with the Minutemen and the Cramps. Those were two high points. Not that we got paid anything, but we got to play with them. And so we had already played 100 shows or something. When we went to California, it was just like we'd take any show. So we played with everybody that we could. If it was a hardcore show, we'd play it. If it was a 60s show, we'd play it. We just do, the scene wasn't that saturated at that time. And so we just got to play a bunch of places. I think the violence came about from a couple different sources. Again, we weren't like a tough band or a violent band, and I wasn't a tough guy or a violent guy, but it was, I think it was a couple different places. One, the music inspired that with people because we were very hyped up and screaming these crazy things. And so that was one part of it. And then the other part of it was that shows generally were more violent then. Skinheads would go to shows and start fights. It was skins against punks. It was punks. Nobody liked garage people with their little outfits and everything. So there was a lot of that kind of thing. And then there was just a lot of like, we're not going to take any shit from anybody. We're from Chicago. Yeah, I got a paisley tie on. I'm not going to take your shit, dude. I don't give a fuck who you think you are. It's not going to happen. So, there was a lot of that and just a lot of attitude. It wasn't like we knew how to fight or we were like a disciplined army. It was just more like, fuck you. You're not going to tell me what to do. Every promoter was trying to rip you off and not pay you. Every venue was trying to throw you out. Everybody was trying to, it was just there was a weird vibe to it. It was a little ugly. Music was a little uglier then than it is now, I think. And we were that much uglier.
Well, I mean, before we get a little bit too dark here, I mean, you mentioned Monty Python a few moments ago there. The Dwarves have always been one of the funniest bands in my collection. Like, were they a major influence for you with songwriting? Were there more comedy influences going on there?
I mean, yes. I mean, Monty Python to me is like the gold standard of hilarious comedy, both crazy, surreal visual stuff, but then just their wordplay. I mean, I was more into their records than their show because the records were so perfectly constructed humorously. And no group of people knows the English language like the English. Americans don't really speak English. I mean, the English speak English. And there's a way of commanding the language that is just uniquely theirs. But I have other comedy influences too, a lot of Canadian and American stuff. So, Saturday Night Live, the early Saturday Night Live, and the audaciousness of that, Bill Murray and Dan Aykroyd and all those people, Gilda Radner, and then Second City Television, which was like the funniest Canadian people, Eugene Levy and Martin Short. And Steve Martin was a huge influence. He was a very surreal guy. And then Richard Pryor, would say things that nobody had the nerve to say. That whole side of being audacious, Zappa, Pryor, they had that thing of like, we'll say the shit that you're afraid to say. You're saying I can't say this word, I'm going to say it. A lot of that, influenced me as well. I think comedy was a huge influence on me. And I'm glad people see the humor of it, because the side of the Dwarves I didn't like was when people just thought, oh, this is just misogyny. You just hate women and you're just a misogynist, boring person. And here's your boring music that goes, the same way I thought a lot of hardcore music sounded. A lot of people thought my music sounded that way. And whereas I thought I was more of a misanthropist and sort of the whole human race was fucked, and here's our funny take on it, a lot of people just focused right in on like, you hate women, look at these bloody women. And I was like, when I look at Blood, Guts, and Pussy, it looks like strong women warriors who've just been in this battle and have won. It looks very positive to me. But the reaction I got from a lot of people was like, you hate women, you want to hurt women, you're a hateful person, and that really, I never wanted to be that, and I didn't want the band to be that, and now even, people will embrace us from the sort of, right wing manosphere, yeah, they can't censor you, they can't do it. And it's like, you're not quite getting it right. Like, the Dwarves is not to exclude everybody who's not a straight white man who's tough, although that's what I am, right? But it's like, it was for all the misfits, all the freaks, all the nuts. I wasn't against gay people. I wasn't against women. We weren't against that stuff. And I didn't understand. I mean, I guess I understand why people take it that way, because you always take things get reduced to their most basic elements, but
Well,
it's
it's
like,
because the music is so fast and aggressive, I mean, it
right.
hits you in the face. People think, holy shit, these guys are being serious.
Right. And that's why, like, when I heard hip hop, it was such an eye opener, because it's like, wow, you can dance to this and people like this and women might actually listen to this. And yet then it had all these messages of misanthropy and misogyny and violence and all these things, but people were okay with it. And then it was like, you combine that with like, oh, look at 50 Cent's 6-pack abs, like a bunch of chicks are listening to, hey, I'm going to shoot everybody, let's dance, you know what I mean? So it was that was another fascinating side of it,
Yeah, well, so what came first then? Was it the music or the album cover?
The music. I mean, the album cover again is another Misfits tribute. I went to Michael Levine, the photographer, and I brought Initium, the Samhain album, and I said, let's do this with chicks, So that was, yeah, I mean, that was the concept. And I had the title Blood, Guts, and Pussy. I mean, that's just my idea from the jump, but it was based off that Samhain thing.
Yeah, well, originally it sort of sounded like Saltpeter might have been the lead vocalist there for those early recordings. What was the reason for him taking a step back as the band became more of a hardcore thing?
Well, Saltpeter was always sort of the only musician in the band and the one who could actually figure things out and knew how things went, but he was not the vocalist. The vocalist you're thinking of was Simone. He was originally just my buddy who played like maracas and tambourine and would sing some songs, and I would sing some and he would sing backups. And then he became the drummer, Simone, on those records, as we got more punk. And so he quit singing. He went on and had bands called Sloppage and Specula in Chicago. And he was a very good singer and a very creative guy. And he wrote the song Fuck You Up and Get High, which to me is the definitive Dwarf song. It's like the perfect 1-minute Dwarf song that goes the way a Dwarf song is supposed to go. I always point people to that one and to Fuckhead. And Fuckhead was written by He Who Cannot Be Named. So a lot of times people give me credit for everything, but it was actually the guys around me being talented and writing songs. And it's that way to this day. Like, they helped me realize my vision. And to me, Fuckhead and Fuck You Up and Get High are two examples of like perfect Dwarf songs that go exactly how they're supposed to go. And I didn't write either of those, you know. And even now, you know, with the Jenkem album, you know, there's Nick Oliveri, you know, he's a great singer and songwriter, and even Snoop Hawk, our new drummer, wrote that riff on Must Confess. Fresh Prince of Darkness wrote Drug Lust, and you know, a couple of the songs on there. Andy Now, who sings background vocals and produces with me, he wrote the instrumental part for Confused, you know. So all these people write stuff, and then I'm more like the ringmaster, and I just pull it all together and make it Dwarves. You know, I write a lot too, but I think the band is more interesting because everybody writes, and it winds up being, you know, with most bands, one guy's writing, or one team, you know, two guys writing, and so all their songs sound the same, you know. But with the Dwarves, you know, you get this real difference, this variety.
Yeah, well, just before we move past this album completely, I just had to ask you, it seems that the B-side of Blood, Guts and Pussy is a little bit different in different regions. Was that an intentional thing on your part? For as an example, my English CD version has the song Fuckhead listed on the back. It's not on this CD, so that's like an incorrect listing. But everywhere you go, the B-side tracks are kind of different, like Astro Boy.
What's the label there? Is the label Glitter House?
This is Sub Pop.
Yeah, so Sub Pop in Europe had Glitter House, that was a German label, and maybe they reprinted it and added that Fuckhead from the from the Sub Pop Singles Club. And it's possible that it was just like, look, this album's too short. It's like an EP. Like, we need another track, you know. I didn't really keep up with all the permutations back in those days. I know more now because I actually own all the records and manufacture them and get it done. So I know more about, like, oh, this was on blue vinyl, or this was this or that. But back in the day, I didn't pay any attention to that shit at all. I don't know who put extra tracks on things or what, you know.
So, would you say that Fuckhead was the oldest song from this album?
It would be, yeah, because that was the Singles Club single. That was our first release with Sub Pop. And then came the Blood Guts record, and there was also a single associated with Blood Guts, which was Drugstore. And the B-sides on that were Motherfucker and Astro Boy, which didn't appear on the original Blood Guts. I've reprinted it with everything on it, but not Fuckhead, because I consider Fuckhead part of the earlier I consider it Blood Guts and Forward. And so to me, that Singles Club thing, I put that in with the Free Cocaine album. Like, this was before Blood Guts, and then there's after Blood Guts.
So what are your fond memories then of recording this album? Was it like the band was ever particular about, you know, recording techniques or using specific equipment or getting their stuff down?
No. we used the gear that we went up there on tour with, which was a Marshall. We were very happy to have a Marshall. I think we traded great vintage Fender amps for a Marshall just because it was louder. And the Marshalls from those days, though, were good amps. We recorded it with a very nice guy, Jack Endino, in Seattle, who I like a lot. He had a band called Skin Yard, and I remember Kim Thale from Soundgarden stopped by just to say hi to him, and it was the first time I'd ever seen anybody from TV like up close, you know. And Soundgarden was just starting to explode at that point, 1989. So that was kind of exciting. It was like, wow, there's famous people around and people know things about us and whatever, you know. I doubt he remembers stopping by. What I remember, you know, it was very hard making records in those days with the kind of budgets that were there. I mean, you'd spend all day at the studio and then you were done, and that was it. You couldn't go back and change things or do things again. It was probably one day to record it and then one day to do vocals. And then I wanted samples and sounds on it. So I demanded that let me go back to San Francisco and spend my own money putting samples on here. they didn't even call them samples then. We didn't even know what a sample was. We just hit cassette decks, trying to hit it on time, and whatever. So to get those sounds, like backseat of my car, the car crashing, or let's fuck, the porno sounds or whatever. So I mean, everything was recorded very quickly. You didn't have a lot of time to play with shit, and it was to tape. There was no Pro Tools, so what you see is what you get. That's what we played.
Well,
But I
if you want to
remember
get
having fun
technical, I mean,
doing
it
it.
came out the perfect record.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's something to be said for that. Pro Tools allows you to finger fuck stuff to death, and sometimes that makes stuff better, and sometimes it doesn't. For something like Blood Guts, I'm glad we didn't have it.
Yeah, well, as these shows then started to become more and more violent, which was probably perpetuated by this album, how do
Right.
you...
The album made people react to us more, and then we'd go out and play, and it was like, oh, these guys think they're tough, and then people would come and attack us. Yeah.
So then when you're on stage and you're playing your show, doing your thing, you show up to a town, you just want to play
Naked
for the...
too. It's really hard to fight when you're naked.
Well,
But you
yeah, man.
also scare a lot of people off. Like, I think we did shows where skinheads showed up to fight us. And it was like, I'm not touching that faggot, and it was like, good, I don't, I'd be standing there in fishnet stockings with my dick hanging out, and I'm still a pretty big guy. It's like, hey, you
Well,
want some of this.
well, from time to time, people are actually getting their heads smashed in with a guitar, or you're knocking a couple of people's teeth out when you hit them in the face with the microphone. So was it ever difficult in your minds to just get off stage and just be Paul after that?
Oh, yeah. Very difficult. And it changed my personality. I mean, it made me more Blag-like because I had to be. And it was yeah, I mean, and it was kind of a coming of age story, but I can't complain because I asked for it and I did it. But I think people don't always understand what kind of a price you pay to be that guy. So I think it's important to like have a sense of humor about it. I always tried to have a sense of humor about it. Like, I didn't take it seriously. I knew that it was an act, but it's the best corollary I can come up with is like pro wrestling, right? Like, some people would say it's all an act. It's fake. They know who's going to win. It's an act. It's fake. It's like, you wouldn't last 5 seconds in that ring with those big dudes slamming you around. Fake or not fake, you would get your head knocked in. You would be knocked dizzy. You wouldn't know shit in 5 seconds. If you would have gone through what we went through and paid the kind of penalties we did for nothing. This wasn't like, hey, it's the Beatles, so you get your $1,000,000, and hey, the girls wanted to rip your clothes off. This is like, for a dog shit show that 50 people went to, you're getting your teeth knocked in for $100. That's what it was. And to do that week after week, month after month, year after year, decade after decade, to have the fortitude to do that, almost nobody has it. You have to believe in what you're doing. And the records for me were the most important part because that was the lasting thing. I mean, you're going back and talking about Blood Guts. A lot of people in America just know me from like, damn, I went to see those guys 1991 and there was a fight and this and that happened. Did you buy their record? No. Even people that wanted it couldn't find it. You know what I mean? It was like, it wasn't in the store. Half my shit got taken out of print. So it was very like, it was heartbreaking over and over again, just to be told, oh, we're not putting you on this radio show, or we're not putting you on this festival. Oh, you can't do this, you can't do that. Oh, you said fuck. Oh, you pulled your dick out. Oh, you have a naked woman. It was just, the answer was no, 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 no. Drop, 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 drop. It was just, that was what it was. So I'm proud that we had the tenacity to stick with it and believe in the project without getting thrown off course. And paradoxically, the other thing that happened was a lot of the people that were very successful in the 80s and 90s are shells of human beings now, drinking and drugging their way into a stupor. You know why? Because for 2 or 3 years, everybody paid a lot of attention and kissed their ass and returned their phone calls. And now they can't handle that nobody gives a shit. And for me, it's just the opposite. It's like, oh, cool. Some young guy wants to talk to me about my old shit. I guess I am cool, and I always did my shit, and I never got wavered, and I don't fantasize about the glory days of the old days. It was tough. It's easier now, so the Dwarves are really a shining example of what a punk band is supposed to be and what an independent band is supposed to be. um you know
So, what's your most exciting memory from that hardcore era?
I fucked 3 girls in one day once. I woke up with one and then met one randomly in the afternoon who I'd known from somewhere else, and then that night picked up someone else. You relive these things. I had these crazy, just my whole sex life from that era was off the charts and weird. Um, I mean, I was very straightforward sexually. Just I like to fuck. I wasn't like real kinky, crazy, but it was just like multitudes of people. Just I was just a terror. I just was ripping through the gene pool with ferocity, and unapologetically. So that was a lot of it. The fights. I'll go back and talk about them, and people like to talk about it, and it definitely colors the era, but I didn't enjoy that, and I was scared by it. But the sex was great, and just staying high, and, you know, but, then there's the music of it, the thrill of like writing a new song, being like, yeah, we really got him with this one, making a new record and going, this time we're going to do it, and just being with your friends, being with my friends. I mean, that's the best part now, is getting to hang out with my friends. A lot of people who are my age, I just turned 60. They don't really have friends anymore, and they don't really get to hang out like that. And they don't really get to enjoy life in the way that I do, So I feel very lucky.
So, what are the top 3 tracks for you off this album then? Like, obviously, you've kept a lot of them around in the live set over the years. Is that because you want them there, or is that by demand of the fans?
Well, let me start by saying this. We've talked a lot about Blood, Guts, and Pussy. We just made a record called Jenkem, and I bet you if you like Blood, Guts, and Pussy, that you would like Jenkem. And I'm very proud of that. You know what I mean? And even though we evolve in certain ways, we devolve in certain ways. And, I hope Blood, Guts, and Pussy is not the only thing that you're aware of, or that fans of the band are aware of. It's fine if they are. I mean, a lot of bands only touch you for one record at one time for one reason. I love Backseat of My Car. I love Let's Fuck and Drugstore. Those are probably my big 3 from that one. But the whole record's good. It's very short. It's fun. Astro Boy. Saltpeter wrote Motherfucker, and that Jim Carrey sung that in a movie. So that came to be probably our best known song from that era.
So then, who reached out to you in order to get that to happen? Was that like an agency came to you directly, or
yes.
How did they discover that song?
Yeah, and I give props to the music supervisor who was hip to it. It certainly didn't come from the label, and then the label ripped us off and tried to keep all the money from it. We, but fortunately, there was a class action suit being threatened against them at that time by a different band who got us involved with it. And I said, yeah, and they just stole my money for that. So they gave us that money. So yeah, I mean, that was, but just seeing Jim Carrey, who's a genius, on screen singing "Motherfucker" I mean, it was incredible,
Yeah. Are there any plans for the 40th anniversary of that record?
I guess there should be. That's a good idea. I guess what would that be? 19, or well, that'd be 2030 would be the 40th anniversary of it coming out. Was recorded the year before. Yeah, there should be. Maybe we'll go on tour with somebody who's like a thrash band, and will play Blood Guts in its entirety. We've done that in the past. Fun to play the whole record. Again, I get a little more of a kick out of doing like Young and Good Looking, which is actually our most popular record, and that one is a little more pleasurable on the ears, and if, to me, has less filler. There's some fillery tracks on Blood Guts. I think Young and Good Looking is without, it's a perfect half an hour of music that with with very little that's not recommendable on there. But yeah.
So the closest the Dwarves ever came to making Blood, Guts and Pussy Part 2 was the Thank Heaven for Little Girls album. So was this just like, let's go in, let's do this same thing again, but this time around we're going to have more of a country and western sort of folk twist? Because there's a little bit of a country twist to some of these songs. Am I right in saying that?
There's a little bit of slide guitar on Blood Brothers Revenge, so I don't know if that counts as that. And we kind of had our first ballad, which was Dairy Queen, which isn't actually on the album as originally released. It was on the CD, I think, but it wasn't on the vinyl because they wanted to save something for a 7-inch, But yeah, I think it was just the same band, right? It was only a year later, so. I think that got recorded in late 1990 and came out in 91. The title, I think, escapes people now. People see Thank Heaven for Little Girls and they think, what the fuck is wrong with you? Thank Heaven for Little Girls was a famous song that was in a musical called Gigi. It was sung by a French guy, Thank Heaven for Little Girls, the tagline is, they grow up in the most delightful way. So it's like, it wasn't supposed to be a song about little girls. It was supposed to be a song about, isn't it great that these little girls will become women? So, I mean, it was an innocent song, but then when you make that the title of your record, it's not so innocent anymore. And that was the humor of it. But I think now the joke is kind of lost on a lot of people.
I took it more as like, because as you can see on the cover, the little girl has a Dwarves tattoo. So she's an inappropriately young fan, but it's like, thank heaven for all these young kids buying our records.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And it was, that one opens up with Satan, which is a great kind of Dwarves hardcore jam, and Speed Demon, which was a further thing of the Detention Girl. Like, it's got a breakdown, but the breakdown's at the top of it, to kind of mosh. What else is on that one? Lucky Tonight was kind of a cool riff, and I stand behind that record. I think it's a great record.
So were any of those tracks lingering from the Blood, Guts and Pussy session?
I don't think so. Well, the first time we went to Seattle, we played the song Underworld, which didn't wind up on a record until Sugar Fix. So I think what happened was, we kind of went through a renaissance period around 89 and wrote a shitload of material. So a lot of that material that wound up on Thank Heaven might have already been written or in the set by the time we did Blood Guts. We might have already had a lot of that. It's hard for me to remember exactly what songs.
Well, I was going to say, I think maybe Lesbian Nun and Fuck So Good might have been recorded for this one, because they have a sort of similar sound.
Yeah, Lesbian Nun, I can't remember where that was recorded. It might have been in San Francisco. That came out on an early compilation called Dope Guns and Fucking in the Streets that was on Amphetamine Reptile. And what was the other one you said?
Fuck So Good?
Fuck So Good. So that was probably all written during that same period. That was a little more of a countryish song. That song actually, the only real version of it that ever came out was on a bluegrass record I made called Earl Lee Grace, Blackgrass, which came out in the mid 90s. And I thought Fuck So Good, the chord progression was when you played it too fast as a punk song, it didn't really work that great, but it worked better. Like, you won't see no pictures of me pasted on nobody's wall, you know. So yeah, that was reworked as kind of a country bluegrass thing.
Yeah, well, this album contains my all-time favourite Dwarves track, which is Fuck 'Em All. But you guys ended up re-recording that later, and it was played much faster, so I wasn't used to hearing the version that's on this album. Why wasn't it just naturally in your guys' heads at that time to play that fast?
It got re-recorded on How to Win Friends. Is that right? Yeah. Um, I think that's a matter of debate. First of all, again, another classic Dwarf song that I did not write. It was written by Saltpeter, and it was based off a riff from a side record I had done called Penetration. I had a song called L.A. that went um and um so he kind of took that riff and went but for my money, his song was better than mine. So we did that, and I like it at the tempo. I think again, there's a lot of Dwarf songs that are too rock and roll to play too fast. When you play them too fast, they don't sound right anymore. And that's kind of the challenge of doing hardcore stuff. Keep making it rock, like, can you play something at 300 beats a minute and it still feels like it swings and rocks? With almost every band, the answer is no. They play thrash, it's rock, but it doesn't roll. There's no soul to it. So to me, fuck them all. Like, if you take that riff and you go too fast, like, it doesn't really catch the vibe of.
Well, I don't think
And you
you
could
ever
do it
played it
even
that
slower,
speed
like
live.
rockabilly, and just be like, there's just different ways to do it. Same
So
riff.
you guys just never went back to playing it slow, I don't think?
I don't know. We do it live. You'd have to look at live things and see what the tempo is, because a lot of times live tempos are faster than in the studio. Um, I play it acoustic sometimes, and we'll do it much slower. So yeah, I love that song. Fuck 'em all. Lyrics are hilarious. I mean, Saltpeter, just a brilliant guy. I still see him all the time. He's just a very funny guy. He wrote a lot of songs for SpongeBob, and I wound up singing "Do the Sponge" for SpongeBob in the first season. So Saltpeter had a lot of talent and a lot of different things he could do.
Yeah. Well, I've got the crappy version of this CD, by the way. It has Sugar Fix attached to it, so some of the tracks are like in the wrong order and mixed round. This one has Gashwagon on it
Right?
from Blood, Guts and Pussy, which should not be on here, but as you say, Dairy Queen didn't make the original pressing of this record, so does that not make it an EP? I think that comes under 14 minutes.
I mean, for the Dwarves, I think we pack a lot of interesting song things into those 14 minutes. And so to me, they're not EPs. When you've got 13, 14, 15 tracks on a thing, it's not really an EP anymore. You could make different arguments about that. If you're just going by song length, then maybe it is. But we went very fast, and so we crammed a lot of stuff in there. Jenkem is probably 20, I don't know, 24 minutes maybe. So it's not really that long. 14 songs. You could call that an EP sometimes. I call them albums because I think they have complete ideas that start at point A and end at point Z and go somewhere in between. You know, um, it's very kind of German to like want your rock by the pound. People would come up to us. I'm looking at my watch. You only played for 38 minutes. It's like, okay, dude. Did you have fun during the show? Did you like any of the songs? Well, yes, but 38 minutes. I don't. It's just like, okay, dude. I'm not really counting minutes. I'm trying to make an experience.
So does that mean you consider the Tooling record an album, Making Blood and Guts
No,
the third album?
that's an EP. It's 3 songs aside, I think. That to me, Lucifer's and Tulin are EPs. Some things are singles and they have enough material on them to be an EP. Do you call it an EP or a single? What do you do? I don't know.
All right, so just wrapping up on the Thank Heaven for Little Girls album, then the song "Blood Brothers Revenge."
I know someday you're going to get to a new decade, Jay. We're bogging down here in the old shit, but if that's where you want to be, I'm not. It's your show. I got 10 minutes left. I think we did just make a record called Jenkem that's a classic, and the one before that. I mean, what's cool about Jenkem is that it's a very straightforward punk album like these ones you're describing. And so I think old fans would like that if they bother listening to it. But prior to that, we did a very sprawling, every different genre, heavily produced, Josh Freese on drums kind of record called the Dwarves Concept Album, which is like that very complex, heavily produced side of the Dwarves, which is really a lot different. But again, there's always a couple hardcore songs. So we never totally turn our back on Blood Guts and Thank Heaven. But it's like, well, but we can do this too. We can do that too. Here's a pop punk song with a female vocal. Do you enjoy that? Well, here's a down-tuned, weird new metal, stoner rock jam. Do you like that? We go in a lot of different directions with these albums, and it's easy to kind of get bogged down in nostalgia and go, hey, what was everything that happened with this album? But it's like the Dwarves have 18 albums out, and I really think I understand fans, because I do this with some bands too, where I go, fuck, they made 10 records, but I only like that first one. It's like, fine. If all somebody likes is Blood Guts, I'm okay with that. At least you like one of my records. But I try and make records to keep your brain occupied, to keep you interested. And I never turn my back on the old nasty stuff. I love that stuff. So I'll talk about it. I'll do it. But it's like I'm promoting this newer thing because I'm excited about it, because it's a good record. And all the reviews I'm seeing of it are people going, damn, it's like these guys never slow down. It's like, yep, we don't. We have the energy is there, and that's a kind of a rarity with an old band, So if you're fucking with the old Dwarf shit, I would just challenge anybody, buy this new record and buy the record that came before and see what it does to your brain. You might just like it, or you might not. And you might go, fuck it, these guys were only cool for a second in the 90s, Okay, fair enough,
Well, believe me, I am that guy. I do get every new thing that the Dwarves puts out. I'm a huge fan of the Dwarves. Always loved the Dwarves. But I gotta tell you that you guys made the perfect farewell record with The Dwarves Must Die. You follow it up with the perfect comeback record, The Dwarves Are Born Again. I mean, 2 totally golden albums back to back.
I appreciate that.
And I'm definitely excited to get the new album, though I don't like listening to albums until I actually have them in my hands. I've only heard the songs you put out music videos for. One of them is very cinematic.
Yeah, so for Damned If I Do, that was interesting because it's very much a straightforward hardcore album. But then right in the middle of it, I wrote this kind of 90s pop kind of song that was mid-tempo rock. I was like, fuck, you could hear this on a classic rock station. So we just went and made kind of a 90s guy video of it. We found a good young director in Hollywood and a bunch of cute chicks and made like a big cinematic thing for Damned If I Do. But then the rest of the videos are just these animated junky videos. I got a guy in Croatia that makes some for me, and a guy in Brazil that makes some for me, and our friend Lloyd Nickel, who's been following the band a long time, tour managing and filming. He made a cool video for the song We Are the Scene. That's just us live. So you get to kind of see modern live Dwarves with, yeah, man, it's just a fun record full of like these goofy videos. But then there's this one kind of serious song, love song, plunked right in the middle of it. That's kind of but it works, I think Dwarves records work in their totality,
Yeah, so how was this different from the previous albums then? Were you like working on any new songwriting techniques? Did you bring in more guests like you usually do? Were they writing stuff?
No, and in fact, like this was the first one where Snoopak, our drummer for the last 7 or 8 years, really got to show what he can do and play all the songs. Because I've been friendly with Josh Freese for decades, and if he was willing to play on your record, you're like, let's have Josh play on our record. And he played on a lot of them, starting with Must Die and Born Again, and that's where you see that quality raise. Um, but you know, for this album, it was very immediate and direct, no real guest appearances much. Kate Vargas, who's a good female vocalist, kind of singer songwriter, she's the female voice on Damned If I Do. And then Mad Lucas, who sings with a band called the 666, she sings on a song called Too Messed Up to Mess Around, kind of a snotty, glammy vocal. So those are kind of the guests. But yeah, there wasn't a lot of guest stuff on this one. Whereas again, on concept album, it's just swimming in different people, guys from every era of the band, and different people coming in and doing different things. And like Must Die that you mentioned, I mean, that was like the king of cameos. We had like Nash from Urge Overkill, Girl, You'll Be a Woman Soon, and that stuff. Along with San Quinn, the gangster rapper who lives on my block in San Francisco, along with Dexter Holland from The Offspring, along with DJ Mars, like a Wicca Wicca DJ. I mean, there was just like all these people that would never be on an album together, and all of a sudden they're all on The Dwarves Must Die. And again, when that came out, our fans largely rejected that album. It was very ambitious and it had so much interesting stuff. But a lot of our fans were like, I like the punk stuff. Fuck you. And it was like, okay, shit, I don't know what to do. I
Well,
mean, that
it's
song's
got
got
some of the
Dominator
fastest
on it.
songs on there.
Yeah. I mean, but it's got Dominator on it. It was one of the most punk songs we ever did. And fuck that bitch and go. I mean, it wasn't like we mellowed out, but then there's all these other kinds of songs. And Salt Lake City is very pop punk, and then Like You Want is very kind of rock and roll. So to me, it's interesting to hit all these different genres. But some of our fans really hate that, and they're just like, make a punk record, stop fucking around. It's like, okay. So you just never know how people are going to react. As an artist, I just have to try and make something that's going to keep me interested.
Yeah. Well, would you still feel confident in like picking up the phone and just calling Dexter if you needed him?
Boy, Dexter's been on five Dwarves records and a Ralph Champagne record. I did call him not long ago because they were playing, and I hadn't seen them in so long. And I hollered at him. He's always very nice to me. He's just a great guy, and and Noodles too. And they've just been very cool to me over the years. I really appreciate the time that they've given me. I mean, these are guys who riding a plane around and making multi-platinum records, and just they don't need me. But there he is. And they put me on the list. I went to the show, I hung out. It was just and what you're reminded of with The Offspring, how many great songs they've written. It's just like, oh, I remember that one. Oh, I remember that one. Oh, right, that one. Oh, wait, that one too. And you're just like, shit, dude, really? I mean, it's like an embarrassment of really catchy material that they've come up with over the years. And the thing I liked about Dexter too is that he always was he'd put in those little flourishes, sound effects. He'd put in a little riff, but then he'd have a guy going, keep them separated. It was like a little sound effect, and it was like a lot of punk bands, even ones I really liked and respected, like Green Day, where, that guy was a great hit songwriter and wrote these hit songs that were just undeniable. But Dexter would add that extra element of little hooks that really keep me going. You know what I mean? So I'm a fan.
Yeah, well, I just got to say, I mean, I love the Dwarves a lot more than the Offspring. I think the Offspring are totally fine, but the
Me
Dwarves
too.
are one of my all-time favorite bands. So
I hope so. I mean, shit. I think his ego can take it. He gets enough applause, quite a bit more than I ever got. So I think he'll survive.
yeah, well, would you rate this as high as some of the classic Dwarves albums? Like, are the old school fans just going to love this when it comes out? A couple of days, I think it comes out.
No, it's out now. Yeah, it came out
It's
June
out now.
5th.
I thought it was the
Jenkem is
17th.
out. I would say, basically the way I rate Dwarves albums is like perfect on its own terms. And I would give that to Blood, Guts, and Pussy, Young and Good Looking, Must Die, and Concept Album. I think they all achieved what they were attempting to achieve in a 100% way. And then there's other kinds of Dwarves records where I still love them because they're my kids. And I just think they are great records, but they're not necessarily perfectly organic circles that like, oh, this makes perfect sense everywhere. I would put Jenkem in the I give it a 95, not 100. You know what I mean? I can't, you know what I mean? Like, whereas Concept Album, I give it 100. I put so much effort into that. But, what's funny is I think Jenkem was the record that needed to come out now because it was an answer to that Concept Album that was like, here, the production's perfect. And, here's another naked Dwarves cover, but it's unique. And we did this and that. It's like this record was like, no, fuck that. We're going to put a cover on that looks like a 70s bootleg. And no, we're just going to use our live drummer because he's fucking brilliant and he's going to kill it. And, we're just going to make a punk album this time. So, I mean, Jenkem was really the record we needed to make right now. And I'm 100% behind it, but yeah, the ones that in my mind, it's like there's the ones that are sort of perfect on their own terms, and then there's just the ones that are a good album. I mean, when you talk about Born Again, to me, that's just a good fucking record. I love it. It's tons of great songs. But Must Die was like the perfect example of that. You talk about Thank Heaven, it's a great record. I love that record. But Blood Guts was the perfect example of that. So that's kind of how I look at it. My brain sort of works that way. But I think everybody should go out and get Jenkem. It's a real breath of fresh air for Dwarves fans. If you feel like we've been getting too sophisticated and too produced, check this one out,
All right, Blag, my man, I'm going to let you get the fuck out of here, dude. This has been another wonderful podcast moment for me. Can't wait to get the new album now. I'm sure it's going to be great. So thank you so much for doing this, dude.
Hey, we love you, Jay. Thank you for paying attention to this band. Thank you for asking us questions. We really appreciate it. And, send me a link, man. I'd love to see it.
Yeah, man. All right, we're done.
Great talking to you, man. Thank you. We'll see you soon.
See you soon, buddy.
Nobody knows but what they've been told.